Hey everyone, thank you for joining us for the first session of our Fabric Data Days. My name is Anna. I'll be your producer for this session. I'm an event planner for Reactor, joining you from Redmond, Washington. Before we start, I do have some quick housekeeping. Please take a moment to read our code of conduct. We seek to provide a respectful environment for both our audience and presenters. While we absolutely encourage engagement in the chat, we ask that you please be mindful of your commentary, remain professional and on topic. Keep an eye on that chat. We'll be dropping helpful links and checking for questions for our moderators to answer. Our session is being recorded. It'll be available to view on demand right here on the Reactor channel. With that, I'd love to turn it over to our presenters for today. Thank you so much for joining.
Hello, everyone. My name is Heidi. We are going to be kicking off the 50 days Skillfest Fabric Data Days. You may have heard it just recently started cropping up. We're going to talk about DP-203, which is a retired exam, to DP-700, the new Fabric Data Engineering exam that's coming out. That is out. Now, all about today, we're going to be talking about that PaaS world, shifting into a SaaS world. We're going to take you through the DP-700, talk about the skills transition. But first, let's introduce Martin and I, and we are live. So you are talking to us in the chat, talking to our moderators, and we are here for this next hour. My name is Heidi Hasting. I am a data platform MVP. I'm also a certified trainer. You can reach out to me on socials. Now, I'm from Australia, and Martin is from Australia, but do post in the chat where you're from. I know we've got people in all different time zones, so I will say good morning, good evening, good afternoon, and it is a very early morning for a number of you joining us at like 1 a.m. That is awesome. We're excited to be talking to you this morning. Martin, do you want to introduce yourself to the crowd?
Yeah, thanks a lot for Heidi. So I'm Martin, and I have a very similar background to Heidi. And the 203 exam and the 700 exam have helped me to transition my skills. I started with SQL Server many, many years ago, and I took 203 about 5 or 6 years ago, transitioned onto Azure, and then I'm transitioned again onto Fabric with DP-700. So that's basically me, Heidi. Now, who have we got in the moderating? Oh, so we've got Andy, Mario and Jen. So 2 MVPs and a Microsoft person there. They're in the chat. It's only available on the live chat. So if you've got questions, you've joined, take advantage of it. Throw your questions in there. And these 3 great people will answer them as well as they can.
I'm so excited to see where everyone's from. I mean, we are global. This chat is global. So just remember, when you are working with the data products, when you're working with Microsoft Fabric, not only are we working with these enterprise grade, amazing products, but we are working with a global community that is there to help you and there to make you succeed. And that's why we're doing things like this, supercharging your career and talking about the 50 days of data and AI. So if you haven't already seen it, head over to ak.ms/Fabric Data Days, and we will point out that all the links you see popping up on the slides are also going to be in the ribbons. The team's putting them in the chat. Remember to ask those questions. If you missed a link, just feel free to ask someone in the chat. We'll try and get that there for you. But we got a whole bunch happening in this 50 days. Not only can you learn from these sorts of live sessions, but we have a lot in the schedule. So let's look at what that schedule is.
Yeah, so Heidi, we've got a lot going on today because it's the 4th today where most people are. It's actually the 5th in Australia where we are. This will be repeated in other time zones, but we've got free exam vouchers. We've got data viz contests. We've got a lot going. So we've only listed like the next 2 or 3 days there on the slide, but there is sessions throughout the next 50 days. So just make a note of that. See those links on the slide. If you want to check them out, head there. But what else have we got in store, Heidi?
We have contests. Like, you've all seen that contests and challenges are a great way to learn. And if they're not for you, that's okay. Do go check them out, right? Because they're really good for inspiration. So these contests, the data viz world, wow, like data viz has always been a thing and it's always been there. But just in the recent times, probably the last year, we've started to see more and more challenges specializing in data visualization. And it is open to everyone of every every area. If you're a beginner, if you're advanced, if you're intermediate, jump on and give these competitions a go. Now, when we talk exclusive fabric swag, I mean, Martin, you've seen me rocking around the fabric kicks, the custom Nike fabric shoes, but imagine all the different swag you can get. I know I'm wearing a Power BI shirt today. I've got my fabric shirt. I've got my fabric hoodie. This sort of swag is what comes out of this particular product arena. You get the chance to be showcased live as well, and you can get some mentoring from people like Martin and myself and other MVPs. We have some amazing data visualization champions, but also for those data engineers, because that's what we're focusing on today, 700, it's all about engineering. There is a notebook contest as well, so make sure you check that out. Get in there, give it a go, and if it's not for you, it's not for everyone, that's cool. Go check out what the submissions are, get that inspiration, see the art of the possible. It's also really cool to be able to justify using Fabric in your employment, in your workplace. Sometimes people don't know what Microsoft Fabric is. Why not show them what some people are doing in the data viz and the data engineering space? And that way they can get an idea of what's possible with this platform. And you never know, you might be able to start using it in your day job. But that's not the only thing. We're talking about certified, right? So when we talk about certified, what's one of the barriers for people getting certified? The cost. If you're not in a company that has enterprise skills initiatives and free vouchers, that's really not a disadvantage for you these days, because you can get vouchers by attending a session like this, a live session where you see these aka.ms FDD Cert 100 Cert 50 links. Also, go and sign up for the challenge. So when you go to those links, it's going to ask you to sign up for the skills challenge. The skills challenge means you have to complete the different learn modules. You've possibly already completed them on your learning journey already, so you might already be halfway there without even realizing. I think the 700 one is like 8 modules. So you go through those learn modules in a fixed time period, and then you could earn yourself a certification voucher. Pretty cool. 100% off, man. Why not give the exam a go if you can get it for free? Give it a go. You still have to pass it. The cert voucher won't give you the pass mark, but it will give you the chance to attempt it without costing you money.
And where do we go for this, Heidi? I think we've got a link on the next slide.
We do indeed. Gotta love a QR code.
Okay. Right, so a QR code, even better. So we'll leave that on the screen a couple of minutes while I talk about my experiences. So obviously, Fabric's been out a couple of years now. Still a lot in previews, still a lot GA, and going through the learn modules, I'll help a lot. Really well structured. I found them really useful to get through my exams. The Power BI one, as well as the PL300, as well as the 600 and the 700. What about you, Heidi?
Well, I used to hate doing exams, not gonna lie. I used to absolutely hate them. They stressed me out from finishing university. I was like, no more exams. And then I went, in about a 2-year period, I went on a bit of gamification, and I decided to sit a lot of exams. And I think I've ended up now with about 13 certifications. I do, in fact, have 700 and 600, so I'm super excited about that. And I have the fundamentals, the 900, and I used to have the 203 until it expired. So don't worry, exams aren't for everyone, but do give it a go, right? Like I said, I used to hate them. Now I see it as a gamification. It's a way to challenge my skills. And I even love doing the certified labs. So you can go in and do what's called an applied skill. So if you're more of a hands-on person and you want to try out in a lab environment that's tested, check out those applied skills. There's 4 of them for Microsoft Fabric specifically. There's real-time intelligence, there's Lakehouse, and those can give you that hands-on experience that then help you sit something like a DP-700 exam. And man, we know there's a ton of resources in the community that can help with this. You got Will Needham, Shabnam, Andy in the chat there. Check out their blogs, Kevin Chant. There's so many resources that can help you study and get prepared for this exam. And we're going to tell you about even more as we go through today's content.
Yeah, we certainly will do that, Heidi. Good call on the more basic exams. That is a really good place to start if you are just starting as a beginner. And it's good to fall back on things like SQL knowledge and, knowledge that people might have already. But enough about the exams, Heidi. Let's get into our core content.
So we do want to point out that the Azure PaaS world used to have the Azure Data Engineer exam. So it was focused on data engineering, but it was focused on data engineering with the Azure PaaS stack. So what do we mean there? We mean things like Azure Synapse, Azure Data Factory, potentially a little bit of Databricks, but more to do with the Delta Parquet and the ADLS Gen 2 storage. So that space was where we had data engineering in a PaaS world. But we're going to transition that with that exam being retired. Data engineers still want the ability to be certified by Microsoft. So that's where you've got the Fabric Data Engineering exam, which is the DP-700. So it focuses on those data engineering techniques. So it's a little bit of same, but different, because you can still transfer a lot of the skills you've learned in the Azure Data Engineer world if you were already doing that, or if you're starting fresh, that's okay too. But we transfer those skills into a SaaS area. So instead of doing things like wiring and plumbing, all the different features together, private links, private endpoints, all the different security protocols, now we're looking at it from a SaaS where we don't have to do a lot of that plumbing behind the scenes, but we still need to do things like monitoring and designing solutions, optimizing them, troubleshooting how they work. Those sorts of techniques that you would have done in Azure Data Engineering, we still do in Fabric, just a little bit different. So the concepts are the same, the application is different. So with DP-700, we're going to focus on that transition point today. So what we want to talk through today, data engineering specifically and the certs around it. So that is the DP-700. 600 is still a little engineering, but it's more analytics. We're going to give you a bit of an overview of Microsoft Fabric in case anyone is new to it. We want to make sure that there's a foundational knowledge there. And then within data engineering, we're going to focus on implementing and managing, ingesting and transforming, and monitoring, optimizing. We only have an hour, so we're going to keep it quite high level, but we're going to go through as much as possible. And remember, do post those questions in the chat.
Yeah, that's cool, Heidi. And as everyone knows, we are live and interactive. You have the opportunity to post your questions, comments, tell us about yourself, tell us where you're from. Have you took the exam already? Have you took one of the exams? You're waiting on another exam? We're keen to know. But remember, this is live and interactive, so you've got the opportunity to ask questions, put them in the chat. There's no stupid questions here. And our moderators will get back to you or pass it over to us, Heidi.
Indeed. So let's talk about those data engineering and Fabric certs. We know Microsoft did a lot of changes in recent years, and they've transitioned them to more of a role-based approach. Isn't that right, Martin?
That is right, Heidi. That is right. So what have we got here? We've got role-based certifications, and all of the exams, no matter if they're Azure-based, whatever, all the Microsoft exams follow a similar structure. They're all role-based certification. So the exam might be called like PL300, but it's about the Power BI analysis. It's about the Fabric Data Engineer, about the Fabric Analyst. So role-based. Obviously, 203, we're helping people in this series transition from, you might have skills that were, Synapse-based skills, stream analytics, that sort of thing. There's a pathway forward to DP-700 and the Fabric Engineer or the Fabric Analysis. And Power BI is part of that. All of these exams have a little bit of a crossover, but obviously pick the one where your strengths lie and go for that in the first instance. That's what I do, Heidi. Have you got anything to add to that?
Yeah, probably the other thing is there's no dependency between these 4 exams, right? So if you want to start with PL300, skip to DP700, go back to DP600, you can. They don't have a prerequisite that you do them in that order. From my personal experience, if you're already doing Power BI development before Fabric came out, probably start with PL300. 300 to 600 is more of that analytics space, so that's going to be a nice transition. And then add on the data engineering, which is going to have overlap with 600, because both analytics engineers and data engineers, we overlap a little bit, but the data engineer is going to focus more on that optimizing performance tuning of our data ingestion feeds and our data loads, whereas the analytics engineer is going to focus more on the semantic model tuning in that space. So if you're going to do them, consider also doing them in close proximity, because the skill sets overlap a little bit. So rather than relearning over and over again, you can leverage the skills that you have and just extend them.
Yep, that's right, Heidi. So let's have a look at what we're doing here. So really, there's 3 areas to the Fabric Data Engineer certification. There's ingesting and transforming, and there's a bit of a crossover between ingesting and transforming. Tools we can use for one, we can use for the other. Now, securing and managing the analytics environment in general is an area in and of itself. And then we want to monitor, which kind of goes across those additional 2 areas. But the exams split up quite nicely into roughly about a third of the exam questions are probably come from one of those 3 sections. So we're going to go over each of those 3 sections. Like Heidi says, we've only got an hour, but we'll do our best. Hey, Heidi.
Indeed, we will. Now, you
Okay.
talked about those 3 sections. Now we've got a bit more detail on what is specifically in those 3 sections are covered. Do you want to take us through it, Martin?
Yeah, I sure do. So we've got implementing and managing applications. We want to be able to configure that workspace. We want to be able to implement life cycle management. So there's a whole life cycle to developing, to maintaining, to just going through the lifetime of your developed application in general. And we need to configure security. There'll obviously be a governance process. Now, governance is more around process, but there are tools within Fabric itself that can help us with that governance journey. And orchestration is often overlooked. So we can use things like pipelines to pull data in, but we can also use Data Factory to orchestrate complete processes. We've got to ingest and transform as well. So ingestion, transforming, a big overlap there. Designing how our load patterns meet our objectives. Ingesting batch data, ingesting streaming data. Batch data seems to have been like the go-to for a lot of people. A lot of people are really firmly ingested into this. Ingested, maybe that's the wrong word. They've got a lot of knowledge on that area. But streaming data, Fabric's making it really easy to stream data and capture that real-time feeds. And of course, we want to optimize and monitor those 2 areas, not only while we're developing, but while our application is in production. Is that right, Heidi? Anything to add on that?
Yeah, I think one thing to note is that people, if you're doing data engineering and you're working in a batch environment, you still need to learn how to do it in a streaming environment, even if you're not doing it today. Because when you saw that previous slide, when you look at the languages there, I'll just flip back because you got PySpark, you got KQL, and you've got SQL. The exam doesn't let you choose which one you get tested on. So you want to be aware of all of them. You don't have to go really deep dive on them. Just make sure you've got enough of an awareness that you're not going to trip up when reading the question. And do remember, these exams are effectively open book. So within the platform, you get access to the docs and the learn material from Microsoft. You can't use things like Copilot and you can't search them really fast, but if you know the headings to look for, you can crack open sort of like a split screen and you can go through the learn and docs. I wouldn't rely on that to pass the exam, but if you're just a little bit unsure when you're going through doing your review cycle as you're doing the exam, maybe consider opening up those learn docs just to double check your answers if you're a little bit unsure. But you don't get any points off if you get a question wrong. So
yeah,
can't
great advice. Great advice. But I think before we get started, we need to tell people just a very quick intro around Microsoft Fabric. Should we do that?
We absolutely should. So let's go through and do an introduction to Microsoft Fabric. Now, we will call out, if you're going to put in a search engine, just Fabric, you're going to get all things about how you make different fabrics, how you can do tie-dye, how you can do seams and patterns. You want to make sure you prefix it with Microsoft to make sure you're looking at the software as a service platform. It is a unified platform. What do we mean by that? Software as a service, unified. You go to one particular service and you get all these features right out of the box. Some of them are preview. You won't get tested on preview features in the exam, so don't worry about that. But when it comes to preview features, they are there, so be aware, but not necessary for the exam. All in one means we've got all these different components or workloads. So we've got Data Factory. That's where we can do a data ingestion. We can do a little bit of transformation. We can do both a low-code, no-code approach, and we can do a more pro-code experience, so pipelines and Dataflow Gen 2. Real-time intelligence, which Martin talked about with that streaming data set. That's where we can take streaming data and process it near real time through the platform, do our aggregations, windowing functions. We can even combine the 2 data sets. So we can combine both our streaming data and our batch data as well. And we have cool extra features like Activator, which allow us to do alerting. And we'll talk to that a little bit later. Databases, this is your Fabric SQL database. This is in preview, so don't expect to see a lot of content in that in the exam, but be aware of it because now that it's in the platform, maybe in future releases of the exam, it will be included. With analytics, that's our data engineering, our data warehouse, and our data science. So that's where we've got Fabric Data Warehouse. We've got the data science space, which is things like experiments and machine learning. We've got the engineering, so that's where we can use the Spark aspect, and we can do things like Python notebooks and all that pro code experience, and our tried and tested lovely visualization tool in the Power BI space. So that is the overarching platform. Now underpinning all that is what we call the OneLake, aka the OneDrive for data, but is our underlying storage based on AWS Gen 2. We'll dive a little further in the next couple of slides on that. And when we say Microsoft Purview here, while there is a Purview hub within Fabric, Microsoft Purview is its own product, but you can integrate the two, which means we can use things like sensitivity labels for our data governance managed in Purview, but applied within Microsoft Fabric. And it wouldn't be a Microsoft product if we didn't have Copilot. And in fact, we have multiple Copilot experiences within Fabric. That feature is something you toggle on at a tenant level.
But what about security, Heidi?
Now, there's a lot we can talk about in security, and we wanted to overlay this with a layered approach. So you start with the tenant. What's a tenant? If you went to the service today, let's say I've got my own domain and directory, I have HeidiHasting.com. If I went to app.powerbi.com or app.fabric.microsoft.com, I would be looking at my tenant in the service. Everything of my HeidiHasting.com, all of my users are going to the same singular tenant. Within that tenant, we also have networking controls. So at all these layers, we've got different security controls that we can do. Network, think things like private endpoint, private link. They are not dissimilar to Azure Data and the PaaS world, but they are implemented slightly differently and not the same. So before in Azure PaaS on DP-203, you might have created private endpoints between your AWS Gen 2 storage and your Azure Synapse. Now within Fabric, because they're all under the one hood, we're not having to create private endpoints between the two features and functionality, but we are to have Fabric talk to, say, an Azure PaaS world. Capacity, as everything with Fabric has to be backed by a Fabric capacity. Capacity is associated to a workspace, and that's what gives us our compute ability. It in itself has security considerations. We can be a Fabric admin, we can determine who can add workspaces to a capacity, and we can look at the monitoring of a capacity. At a workspace level, akin to Power BI, a workspace is an area where we can group all the items together. You can have multiple workspaces to make up a solution. You can have a singular workspace. Now, a lot of this security being applied in layers means it's also inherited and applied throughout. You've got the app that's applicable to the Power BI items only. We have items. Think for items. You've got Fabric Lakehouse, Fabric Warehouse, Fabric Pipelines, Fabric Notebooks, Power BI Reports, Power BI data marts, not so much. And then you've got the other items within the stack, Event House, KQL database within the event houses. And we've got in item security. Why do we want to point this out? When you're looking at security for the exam, when you did DP-203 Azure, you were looking at RBAC controls. You were looking at in item controls as well within databases like Azure SQL and Azure Synapse Studio. Within Fabric, the security is in layers. So you want to be aware that if you give someone, say, viewer at a workspace level, can they look at monitoring? Can they look at the items? Can they edit the items? But then if you just share a specific item or you grant them security within an item, what are the controls they get? And always remember with security, level of least privileged. So if giving them a full workspace control is going to give them access to all the items, when you're reading through the exam questions, if there is a distinguishing thing in the question around level of least privilege or only giving them the access they need and not anything more, you want to check which layer, whether you're applying it at the workspace, the item, or within the item. And there's a couple of other security controls out there also fall in the governance arena. Sensitivity labels, otherwise referred to as Microsoft Information Protection. Dynamic data masking, which is a feature set within Fabric Data Warehouse. Of course, you can do dynamic data masking in terms of masking in notebooks and applying it on the right as well. And endorsing items is another way to consider security and governance. But what else are we going to talk about, Martin? Now that we know those high-level things about what the platform is, as well as what we can do in a security construct, should we talk about like actual solution design?
Yes. We should indeed, Heidi. We should indeed. So we're going to move on to the first section, which is implement and manage an analytics solution within Fabric. It's the first area of the exam, and what will be covered in that area. So things like workspace configuration, lifecycle management, security and governance that Heidi has already talked about. So people might have took DP-203 already, passed it. Regardless of whether you did or you just looked at it, that's a good place to start. The fundamentals themselves haven't really changed. We're still moving data from a source system into a system where we can look at it, in this case, OneLake. We're transforming it within the various things within Fabric, and then we're visualizing it within Power BI. So we have on the next slide, well, on the slide we're looking at now, the data ingestion mechanisms that are going on within Fabric. So from things like mirroring and compute engines. In fact, Heidi, I think we've got, I think we can talk about all of the ways we can get data into Fabric.
There is a lot. Do you want me to flick to the next slide where we actually outline? I think there was 11 different ones.
There are a lot of, we went through them together. So, you know, things that seem really obvious, like manually. Obviously, you can put, well, if you're developing, you can put data in there manually. Probably not going to do that in production. You're probably going to want some sort of automation, some sort of data integration with pipelines, some sort of data engineering with Dataflow Gen 2s. You can mirror data. So you can just hook up to your on-prem SQL database or Cosmos DB or whatever it is. There's a lot more things supported in this area now, and mirror that data or replicate it over to your environment. You can do shortcuts to data within Fabric itself. You can do data shortcuts to other cloud providers like AWS, like Snowflake, like Databricks. You can even drag data in from a semantic model that already exists. So real-time analytics is another way of getting data into Fabric. Obviously, with real-time, you've got something that might exist outside Fabric, which is producing a constant stream of data. Now, your Fabric implementation will need to listen to that and grab it. But once it's grabbed it, it's going through a very similar process to how your batch data would go. Obviously, you can examine it in real time, something which maybe you wouldn't do with batch data. But eventually, it's going to end up in a system, probably on OneLake, to analyze and report on. We've got, like Heidi said, databases on Fabric, so SQL in Fabric, and some things that go along with T-SQL itself, copying, open process, all of those sort of features that you might be familiar with if you come from the SQL world like me and Heidi do. And there's other ways to leverage investments you might have in similar technology. For example, a lot of people have got ADF pipelines. They can want to take that investment and move it to Microsoft Fabric. Now you can move it straight away. You can mount it. There's a lot of options open to you there. So I think that's a good, maybe a good overview of all the things we've got to get data into Fabric. But let's look at the storage in Fabric, Heidi.
Now, just before we shift to storage, there was two things, Martin. I know you tell me this one. We've got shortcuts in a slightly different color. For those of you colorblind, I do apologize, but shortcuts is in a slightly different color. Now, the reason for that, Martin, if I remember, is because shortcuts is not about copying the data, but it's about accessing the data.
It's a good point, Heidi.
Very little nuance in it.
Yeah.
And then mirroring for our DP-203 folk, mirroring is not the same as SQL Server mirroring. So just to point that one right out. With mirroring, it is about connecting to whether it's Cosmos, whether it's Azure Databricks. The mirror is actually, think about it like metadata-driven pipelines and things, where we're automatically grabbing the content from those platforms, putting it in Delta Parquet format on the Fabric platform, so it's a consistent underlying storage. But mirroring, different to mirroring in SQL Server and SQL World.
Very good point, Heidi. Very good point.
Now, onto the storage. We talked about the underlying storage being the OneLake. With that, it is based on ADLS Gen 2 storage. Now, for a PaaS world, you had storage controls that you could put in place, whether it be archiving that hot cold tier changing with policies, whether it's things like soft deletes. Even though OneLake is built on top of ADLS Gen 2, you don't get that toggle to be able to change those sorts of settings. You basically provision a capacity. When you provision a tenant, you automatically have a OneLake. Think of it like virtualized storage. Then when you have your capacities, your data is being stored in that region's capacity. So you can have multiple capacities in different regions, all associated on the same tenant, but only one per workspace. All the Fabric items that are storing are automatically storing in Delta Parquet format in that OneLake storage. So if you do start putting data into a lakehouse, behind the scenes, Fabric is putting that in Delta Parquet in the OneLake. And if you crack open something like the OneLake Explorer desktop application, when you navigate through, you connect to your tenant, you go through your workspaces, they look like folders, and you will actually see the Delta Parquet files representing your data. It is compatible with other things. So I know a lot of people in the chat are talking about Databricks v Fabric. Better together, man, better together. You've got the option of doing hybridized solutions. We can shortcut to ADLS Gen 2 storage that's being written to with Databricks, and we can have that surfaced in Fabric in our lakehouse as a Delta table. It is an ADLS endpoint that can be directly talked to. It has its own endpoint, so you can run things like AZ copy, crack open your PowerShell, type in your different commands and move data in and out. We talked about those 11 different ingestion patterns. We can also copy things from one container to another. Be mindful that you want to have access to both the person that's moving that data around and accessing it. And every workspace appears as its own, and we do have those integrations. There's also now integrations with Snowflake. There's also that compatibility and interoperability across the platforms. Something to note though, when we do the ingestion in Fabric, if it's one of the Fabric experiences writing that data, so if we're using a pipeline or a notebook to take the data and write it into our lakehouse, our warehouse, or if we're doing event streams and processing them into an event house in the KQL database, that's going to be the optimal performant one for Fabric because it's already doing the ordering on top of it. If you're doing things like shortcut to ADLS Gen 2 to Delta Parquet that's written by Databricks, whilst the data is there and accessible, because it's not the Fabric experience writing it to the OneLake, the performance can be a little bit different. So that's something to watch for as you're taking the different exam content.
Yeah, there's no getting away from that latency, Heidi. Laws
No.
of physics.
What about our integration and orchestration?
Okay, let's have a look at that. So integration and orchestration. So let's talk about Fabric Data Factory. So generally, most people know Fabric Data Factory to be a great way to ingest data or pick it up from one place and put it in another. And we can do that great with pipelines, but Data Factory can also be used to orchestrate things that need to happen throughout your life cycle. For example, you could run a notebook activity with the orchestration. Pick a notebook activity. You can run a Dataflow Gen 2 activity, and you could kick one after the other. You might have a medallion architecture where you actually do need to run a pipeline to pull data in. But then you might want to run a notebook to transform that data maybe to your silver layer. And then you might want to run a warehouse stored procedure to pull that into your gold layer. And then obviously you might want to run Power BI refresh on top of that. All those things can be kicked off from within Data Factory itself. So in that case, Data Factory is being used to more or less to orchestrate the process that's happening across the entire life cycle of your application. So I think that might sum up our first section, Heidi. What have we got in store for our second section?
Well, we're going to talk more about that ingest transform aspect. We want to focus on how we store and how we pick our storage, and also the different ways we can ingest data and the different options. We talk about batch and streaming. Let's dive a bit more deeper into that. So the very first one is picking the data storage option that we're going to use in Microsoft Fabric. So when we're talking about storage, we've got Lakehouse. That's great for unstructured, semi-structured files, and it's great for structured data as well. It can do both. Then you've got Warehouse. Warehouse is very much tuned towards more of your structured, semi-structured data. It's great for if you've got SQL skills existing and you want to leverage those. It's best for, large scale data warehousing and analytics. It integrates quite nicely if you've got things in, say, Azure SQL and you want to port them across, or if you're doing Azure Synapse and serverless pools and dedicated SQL pools and you want to move that over to Fabric. The Fabric SQL database is more of our transactional consistency in complex data types. That is coined Fabric SQL. It is the preview one. It only came out, if I remember, last November in the US when it was announced at Chicago Ignite. So that one's still getting a bit of airtime. That's probably really good for control databases, for metadata-driven frameworks. It's really good for operational backends. It's really good for AI enablement as well. So when we look at this in terms of why we would look at the different storage things, it's about choosing the right option. If we have a data analytics solution where we need to provide files in raw file format, any file type, that could be videos, it could be audio, it could be JSON files, it could be XML, it could be any number of files. We want to go for more of a lakehouse because lakehouse supports the ability to upload a raw file. If we want to take skill sets, we've got a pre-existing team that's doing data engineering. They're really heavy SQL Server users, and they want to be able to use those techniques like store procedures, user-defined functions, row-level security, things like that. They can use warehouse. Now you can use a combination of both within your analytical solution. If you look at the docs today and you look at things like the guidance on Medallion, just remember it is guidance. It's not necessarily the be-all and end-all. It's just to give you an idea. So you can have a lakehouse as your bronze, you can have a warehouse as your silver, and a warehouse as your gold, or you can have all three lakehouses, or you can have all in the one item. The options are endless there. So we have that ability. When we're talking real time, though, real time, we want to do a KQL database. And a KQL database is containerized within an event house. You can have more than one. In that event house, you can have more than one KQL database. And by default, when you spin up an event house, you will get a KQL database with the exact same name. So for real time, KQL database. For the other ones, look at whether you're doing structured, semi-structured. Also look at the security that you want to do. If you want to do dynamic data masking, that's a feature of Warehouse. So you want to use Warehouse. Now, we also want to talk, now that we know about our storage solutions and the fact that all of them support multiple data types, and we can do Delta Parquet under the hood, and we've got our interoperability with Iceberg and Snowflake. What else can we do? How do we work with batch data, Martin?
How do we work with batch data? Well, we've got a few options here. And like you talked about options within the tools, there's also options within skill sets. So what skill set might someone have? Are they better off using data pipelines? Are they better off using Dataflow Gen 2s? For example, most engineers will be really familiar with data pipelines. Most people who've come from the Power BI side might be more familiar with Dataflow Gen 2s. So you've got options there. You can also call Dataflow Gen 2s from your data pipelines. So you've got those options to ingest, and you've also got those options to transform. Dataflow Gen 2s would probably be used more to transform, although they can ingest. Data pipelines would probably be used more to ingest, although they can also transform. We've got SQL shortcuts. Heidi's talked about the shortcuts there, where we're virtualizing data that might exist in Databricks or Snowflake or on-prem or whatever it is, but we can still get to it within Fabric. Now, we've got Apache Spark, notebooks, and Spark definitions as well. I tend to find they're mainly used for transformations. Again, you can use them to ingest depending on your setup. But they're used, in my experience, more to transform and pick out bits and pieces of data that we actually need. But before we move on, Heidi, I just wanted to talk about the SQL endpoints. So lots of the data stores that we've got within Fabric and beyond are able to be connected to with a SQL endpoint. So when people say SQL endpoint, through an endpoint via, say, Management Studio, a familiar tool, or ADS, Azure Data Explorer. Now, that endpoint allows you to do a lot of things that are familiar to people who come from a SQL world, but a lot of the times this is a read-only environment. So really good for checking and making sure things are up to date. Doesn't provide all the same functionality that you might expect from T-SQL itself, but very, very similar. But Heidi, I think we've got a decision guide about all this.
We do indeed. Now, when you're looking at the decision guide, we're only including a couple here. So we're talking about the difference between a data pipeline or a copy activity. We got the Dataflow Gen 2, slightly different to Dataflow Gen 1. Dataflow Gen 1 is a Power BI item. Gen 2 is a Fabric item. And then you've got Spark, so think about the notebooks there. So when you are looking at that decision ingestion and when you're reading through the exam questions, some of the key call outs are when they say things like low code, no code, or citizen developer. That means they want something that is a drag and drop style of interface. So that's where you're using things like data pipeline, copy activity, and Dataflow Gen 2. If you want to do transformations on a low code, no code, you're going Dataflow Gen 2 because even though pipeline is a drag and drop experience, it has the UI where you can drag and drop different things onto your pipeline. So where you want to connect to a particular data source, move the data to a particular destination. While that is low code, no code, there's very simple transformations, not complex transformations or a high availability of transforms. So when it's low code with transformation, Dataflow Gen 2. When you want to do pro coding experience where you want to access things, potentially you're calling REST APIs and interoperability there, Notebook. Pro code experience where you want to programmatically define your data ingestion and your data transformations. Something when you're also looking across them, you'll see that there's 150 plus connectors for a pipeline. You're not going to get tested on every possible connector out there. There is a lot and it's ever growing. But you want to be aware of what's the appropriate one for connection. The other thing to note when you're looking at it is, let's say the exam called for a orchestration that allows you to use a combination of these. Remember that while a notebook, technically you can call the APIs to be able to execute other things, it's probably going to be a pipeline that's used for execution and orchestration because the pipeline has the ability to call a Dataflow Gen 2, to call a notebook, and to call it in a pattern on success or on failure or on completeness. So when you're looking at orchestration techniques, you need to look at the interoperability between the different items. If it was, say, using the scheduling techniques, remember Spark has the ability to be scheduled as well. So a Spark notebook can be scheduled. You can have your own custom libraries and you can leverage libraries across workspaces. So when you're looking at the different decision points, whilst from an organizational data analytics solution perspective, you're going to look at it from what's the skill set my team has or is prepared to develop. Do we have any existing solutions that we need to migrate or transition? Or are we building from scratch and what do we want to use in our organization? Because with Fabric, you get this ability to use all of them. Doesn't mean you have to, but when you light up Fabric, you light up all the different features. So we can use all three of these in an analytics solution, but you may or may not want to. So when you're going through deciding as an organization which one you're going to use, you'll go through those factors. In the same way, when you're going through the exam and you're reading through the questions and it's asking you to say which of these would you use, you can look at these different persona techniques and go, oh, the persona in the question is referring to citizen developers, low code, no code. Okay, then I wouldn't have them doing Spark notebooks. But if the persona is, say, you've got a team of former SQL Server developers who are very familiar with SQL and T-SQL, then you might go, I'm going to use things like store procedures to do my transformations, and I'm going to use pipelines to do my data ingestion. So you want to look at what's in the question to determine which of the personas that are at play, what is the different technique, whether it's low code, no code, graphical user interface based drag and drop, or whether it's pro code and the ability to use something like Visual Studio Code and offline editing. And I know there's been some chat going on about source control as well in the chat. Yes, you've got the integrations with Azure DevOps and GitHub. So you've got to remember too about what's the source control aspect, because that was part of the questions too. Now that we've talked about that sort of ingestion decision guide, we know we have 11 ways to ingest the data. We can do it manually upload, we can programmatically do it, we can use the different items, we can mirror, we can access data and leave it where it lives with shortcuts. But let's talk some more about those transformations and that orchestration, I think, Martin.
Yeah, I think that, transformations, orchestration, I think that's a big deal. Obviously there's a big crossover there. So, I mean, I talked a lot about Dataflow Gen 2, about pipelines being useful for ingesting and also being useful for transformations. And obviously, not only the technical aspects of that, but what skill sets do people have to use those things? And I made the point that notebooks, I see notebooks used a lot for transformation. rather than ingestion itself, but you can use that for that. But in this slide, I really want to make the point about real-time intelligence. So when we move on to the next slide in a couple of minutes, Heidi will show a visual representation of this. But before Heidi does that, I just wanted to outline some components. So we need something to listen on the Fabric side for that stream of data to come in. And that's called an event stream. So we get the event stream and we tell it to listen at a certain point. And what is happening outside Fabric is something's producing data, and our event stream needs to grab that data. And you can think of, like, you make an analogy here with a copy activity. It's not quite the same thing. In our batch data, the copy activity is pulling data in, whereas in real-time intelligence, our event stream is listening for that data. But once it's got that data, what's it going to do with it? Well, it's got a few options here. It needs to put it to some sort of storage. That's one option it's got. And the storage that we use to analyze kind of real-time streaming data is the KQL database, so the Kusto Query Language Database. And some of you might be familiar with this from things like log analytics or other security applications that Microsoft have got. So it needs to put it to there. Now, it doesn't have to put it to there, but probably 9 times out of 10, it's going to. It could put it straight to OneLake if it wanted, or alternatively, we can tell our Kusto Query database to replicate that data to OneLake, which isn't on by default. We have to switch it on for the data to actually also go to OneLake. And that might be something people want to do to archive data as well. But apart from those two mechanisms where we're going to storage, we might want to have something called Data Activator, examine that data and act on it in real time. Say, for instance, we have a value that's outside the bound of our average. We might want to alert on that. Say we see a stream of events coming in and they're all within a tight band. Something goes outside of that tight band, we might want to alert on it. Now, we can alert a person through things like Teams, email, what have you, or we can take action to run another process, maybe a corrective action, or maybe some sort of action that you need to do in order to take care of whatever event it is you processed. So, Heidi, you've got a good visual representation up on the screen. Do you want to add a little bit more to it than I have?
I think you covered it off absolutely beautifully there. The only extra thing we'll add is that there is the capability of real-time dashboards. Those dashboards do look a little bit like Power BI, but they're not quite exactly the same, but it allows you to build a dashboard off that real-time data feed as well. And when we talk about KQL querying, we can bundle those queries into a query set. You don't have to use KQL against a KQL database. You can also use T-SQL against a KQL database. So you've got the options there to use either, and combining batch and stream if you wanted to too. Now, we're going to head on into our last section that we cover off for the exam. All the sections are very similar in their weighting, by the way. They're about 30 to 35 for each section. So you want to be well-rounded across the board. Martin, do you want to talk to us about monitoring and optimizing?
Yeah, I sure do, Heidi. So in this section, we want to talk about the fact that Fabric is a SaaS platform. So the monitoring really comes, the monitor and also the optimization, because those two things go hand in hand, really. We monitor something. We don't just monitor for like things that are going wrong. We want to see things that are going correctly as well. Things that we know that people are using. Or dashboards that we know people are using, dashboards that we know people are not using. So we can put our knowledge and our experience in the right place. We want to know when we need to scale. Maybe some people are using a certain dashboard or a certain feature a lot. That might need to scale up. We might need to take action to scale that up in real time. We also want to check things like the data integrity and the timeliness of different data that's thrown in. So essentially, we want to be proactive. We don't want to be reactive. We want to be proactive. And that's why the monitoring applications and dashboards and features within Fabric are available to us. We don't have to set them up per se, although there are other tools we could get that exist within the Microsoft ecosystem to add additional monitoring. But essentially, we want to look for anomalies for the people who build these products, but also to improve the user experience. And like we talked about with real time, to automate alerts if we need to. Anything to add there, Heidi, or shall we move on to the next slide?
I think one little gotcha is when we talk about optimize, remember that underneath a lot of the solutions within Microsoft Fabric, we talked about it being Delta Parquet. So you got to remember when you're working with Delta Parquet and it's creating a lot of individual little files, you want to look for commands like vacuum and optimize to be able to reduce your footprint in files and speed up the performance of working with those files under the hood. So remember those different command techniques as well when working with Delta Parquet. But let's talk about what we can monitor and how we can monitor it. So when we're talking about monitoring those solutions, you think about what Martin said. So in Azure Data Factory, for example, when we're running a pipeline, we could see the execution run of that pipeline. We could see when it was calling another pipeline. We can do the same within data pipelines in Fabric. So we want to be able to identify, has a pipeline run, has it errored, has it passed, what are the parameters passed back and forth. So you think about things in Fabric like the monitoring hub where you can see all the different executions across all the workspaces you have access to. When we're looking at semantic model refresh, you might want to look at, say, the refresh history of a semantic model. And say you want to refresh an individual table or something like that, you can do it through the XMLA endpoints. When we talk about Spark and notebooks, we've got the ability to monitor Spark with its own interface for Spark specifically. So we can see the notebook, we can see the output of the different cells executing. So we can troubleshoot through Spark, and there's the integration to go from the monitoring hub, see that a notebook has been executed, switch into the Spark view and be able to see what cell failed and then how we can resolve that failure, because we can see all the details around what was ran, was it parameterized, what were the parameter values at the time of run, when did it run. When we look at lakehouses and performance optimization techniques, we look at the lakehouse and go, do we need to run a vacuum command or an optimize command? Do we need to set the V ordering appropriately? With the event streams, are we streaming the data and transforming it on the fly or on the wire, or are we storing it first and then doing our transformations, and where has the process fallen over? So when we're doing that monitoring and optimizing, we want to look at what are we trying to monitor? Try to monitor whether it ran or it failed. Are we trying to monitor how long it took to run? Are we trying to monitor where the bottleneck is within our end-to-end process and how we can optimize that? Potentially switching from, say, a pipeline to move the data, switch over to a notebook to do the transformation. We want to look at how we're collecting that data and then how we can resolve an issue. Let's say it's a store procedure, we've changed the data type and there's a failure. How would we resolve that? Would we modify the store procedure? Would we modify the mapping in a pipeline, for example, when we're mapping the schema from source to target? And then how do we optimize that for performance?
Yes,
But
one of the
else
things I've found, well, just if we could just stay on this slide for a couple of minutes, that's all right, Heidi. I just wanted to add sort of my perspective on some of the things that I've found useful monitoring Fabric solutions. So I wrote a lot of notebooks at one stage. And when you run a notebook sort of in development, you obviously go through until it's pretty much running perfectly. But then perhaps you get a problem in production and you're like, oh, I have no idea what happened there because like I've got no output. But you can actually go into the monitoring hub and you can actually see that run of the notebook and what happened in there. So throughout all the cells, like you would run it when you're debugging, you're looking at the screen, you can see all that output that happened when that particular run of the notebook happened. So that's one thing that I really like. But I just wanted to make the point as well about things like data pipelines and event streams. So if a problem comes up, you might need to go in and obviously alter the data pipeline or maybe correct the event stream. Now, after you've made your corrections, you do need to publish those as well. So one of the things that caught me out with event streams, and it might catch you out, it might not, might be obvious, is there's a little button up the top where you can change from your live view to editing and also you can publish there. So I remember I wanted to change something on my event stream when I first started with these, and I was like, oh, where do I go to change that? This setting, it doesn't appear to be in there, but I hadn't changed from my live view into my editing view. So just be careful of that if you're editing things like event streams and other interfaces in Fabric as well. So just wanted to add my thoughts on that, Heidi. Hope that was okay.
Yeah, no, absolutely good call out. The other one is the ability to toggle things on and off within the event stream or an activator alert. If you find you've got some noise happening in your environment, toggle those off. Or if you're working with pipelines, you can have links between the different activities within a pipeline. They can be based on whether it's success or failure. So when you're doing error handling, you might say on failure, run this separate activity, which may well be calling a store procedure to write something to your own bespoke logging. I know there's a lot of chat going on about what is the best practice. Best practice is always relative. Remember, you've got the docs and the learn guides out there that teach you about what the feature sets are within Microsoft Fabric and give you some guides on how to use them best. But best practice is also going to be relative to the solution that you're building. If you're working with a team that is very much citizen developers, business developers, they're probably going to do more solution design with, say, a Lakehouse and Dataflow Gen 2. Then they are going to crack out a notebook and start heavy coding. I mean, we do have the concept of vibe coding and AI to help us these days, but you'll find they're more of a drag drop as they're getting familiar. And whilst there's overlap between being an analytics engineer and a data engineer, that data engineer is going to be more about optimizing and managing the data movement and data pipelines within the platform and how you can orchestrate that across the board. So that's going to be the focal point there.
Yeah. Good points, Heidi. Good point. And Heidi made the point about each activity having did it run correctly or did it fail? So as well as that, you've also got a completed event. So sometimes you just want things to happen, and if they fail, you don't care. You just want it to move on. So completed. But I see we've moved on. We're going to give people tips on how to do things. So we have got Fabric Data Days. This is the start of it, start of 50 days, which I think that's going to take us right up to Christmas, Heidi, if my calculations are correct.
It is getting into the festive season across the world, depending on where you're based, whether it's, you've got Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's, maybe it wants to be your challenge for the rest of the year to close out this calendar year is to get this DP-700 exam in the bank, have that one in your toolkit. Looks good on the CV as well, help you get another job if you're interested in transitioning your career into a data engineering space. But there's a lot happening. So what's coming up next? Of course, prepare. Now, if I recall correctly, it is 1 voucher per person in this round. So if you do go to sign up, you'll be signing up for either 600 or 700. Hot tip though, these vouchers come out all year round. They're not like prescribed as to exactly when they're going to appear. But I believe next month we have a massive Microsoft conference coming up referred to as Microsoft Ignite. And sometimes Ignite comes with what's called the Cloud Skills Challenge, which is a similar challenge experience that you can try and get certification exam vouchers for. There's also 30 days to learn it challenges that happen throughout the year. So if you're interested, have a look at that. The learning pathways, sometimes they have a Fabric exam voucher in there. Sometimes they have an Azure Data Fundamentals. Every so often in the Inner Day series, if you've never heard of Inner Day events, there's Fabric Analyst Inner Day and Fabric Real-Time Intelligence Inner Day. And every so often a voucher sneaks into those as well. And they're run globally around the world. Martin and I just ran a couple in the Asia Pacific region just recently in person, but they're run virtual and in person. So those vouchers, look out for them. This might be just your first voucher, and then keep an eye out for other voucher opportunities that exist. What do you think, Martin?
I think that's great, Heidi. You've summed it up, and it was great doing those events with you as well. But I just wanted to make the point that regardless of whether you get a voucher or you just decide to pay for the exam, I would set a date for it. So, for example, say you get a voucher today, because you've worked through all the learn material. Obviously, a few prerequisites there, but not too hard. Get the voucher. Set a date for the exam. Say, I'm going to set a date in like 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month, whatever it is. Yeah, be different for different people. Have that target that you can aim for and that you can space out the work that you're going to do. You're not rushed. You just do a little bit every day. And before you know it, you're an expert. So that would be my tips, Heidi.
Yeah, the other thing is get hands-on experience. Now, if you're not doing it in your day-to-day job, that's not the only way to get hands-on experience. Microsoft have been really generous in providing the option to do a trial within the Fabric environment. So if you've got access to a non sort of Hotmail or Gmail account, so for example, myself, I have Heidi Hasting domain email addresses that I can use. I can sign up for a trial and I can start playing with the features. And if you don't have a project or a challenge you want to do, go look at the Learn modules and have a look for things like end-to-end tutorials. Some of the modules themselves will have live lab examples that you can walk through. The Fabric platform includes sample data, so you can access sample data to work with on the platform. So they give you all the different things that you can go in and get yourself prepared, get some hands-on experience, do those applied skills. Go through the study guide. It's not just a case of attending today's live stream, which is more of a high-level overview, and then sit the exam. You are going to want a bit of hands-on experience and go through that study guide. Each section has a weighting. I think all three are divided to about 30 to 35%. So you want to go through, you're going to get questions on the different areas. If a section is worth 30 to 35, expect that proportion of questions. The minimum pass mark is going to be 700 out of 1,000, and you don't get negative marks if you get a question wrong. You just don't get additional points to get the question right. And you can change your answers as you're going through. Do complete those Learn modules, go through them. They get updated all the time. So consider going back and running through them again. And if you don't pass the exam first time around, that's okay. Often with the exam, when you finish the exam, you automatically get the results of whether you passed or failed. And with that, Microsoft has really generously provided some potential inclusions of what modules you might want to go and deep dive on a bit further to potentially improve your score next time, and maybe do the practice test as well, because that gives you some familiarity on the types of questions.
Right, it does indeed, Heidi. Let's wrap and get people those links, and also what's going on over the
Yes,
next
indeed.
day.
So you've got those vouchers. Hopefully you've already captured the QR code and got the links, but you've got the 600, 700. Don't forget the 300 and the 900. We are the first of the 50 Fabric Data Days that are coming up, 50 days on a Fabric Skills Fest. Go ahead and check out the schedule for the remaining things coming up this week and going into the weeks ahead. And don't forget to check out those resources to help you prepare.
Yeah, great stuff, Heidi. Great stuff. It's been fantastic presenting with you. I always like presenting with you, Heidi. And yeah, people who are listening, thanks a lot for coming along. Thanks a lot for getting out of bed if you're one of the people who got up at 1 o'clock in the morning. Good luck with the exam. Tell us about your successes. And if you happen to fail, don't worry. Get back on the horse and have another go. You reach out. The community is always there to help you.
Absolutely. Always awesome presenting with you, Martin. And huge thank you to our moderators and our producer team behind the scenes, and to all of you for attending today. Keep those questions coming. Like we said, it's live now. We're finishing the live stream, but if you've got more questions, why not jump on the next session in the series and ask your questions there, or join your local study group or one of the virtual study groups around the world to get yourself all into these Fabric exams and get certified. Look forward to having you all in your success stories. Don't forget to post on LinkedIn your success or social media. Really love having you all for today's session.
Great stuff, Heidi. Thanks for our moderators, Andy, Mario, and Jen. And have a great day, people. See you later.
Thank you all for joining, and thanks again to our speakers. This session is part of a series. To register for future shows and watch past episodes on demand, you can follow the link on the screen or in the chat. We're always looking to improve our sessions and your experience. If you have any feedback for us, we would love to hear what you have to say. You can find that link on the screen or in the chat. And we'll see you at the next one.